The suitcase felt impossibly heavy as I stood on our perfectly manicured lawn, staring at the door that had just slammed in my face. 10 minutes ago, I'd been their beloved daughter. Now I was nothing. My name is Bianca, and I'd just committed the ultimate sin in my parents' eyes. I chose happiness over their carefully crafted plans for my life. "We raised you to be a doctor, not some common cook." Mum's words still rang in my ears, her face contorted with disgust as I'd shown her my culinary school acceptance letter. "But this is my dream," I'd pleaded, watching Dad's expression harden into stone. "I've been cooking since I was 12. Remember those Sunday brunches I made for you?" "Dreams don't pay bills," Dad had cut in, his voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "We didn't spend thousands on your pre-med education for you to throw it all away on this foolishness. I never wanted to be a doctor. You wanted that for me." The words had burst out before I could stop them. "Every time I step into a kitchen, I feel alive. When was the last time either of you felt that way about your jobs?" Mum had gasped like I'd slapped her. "How dare you, after everything we've sacrificed?" "You have until tomorrow morning to change your mind," Dad had interrupted, his tone final. "Either you tear up that acceptance letter and return to your medical studies, or you're no longer our daughter." I'd stood straighter, something inside me hardening. Then I guess I'm no longer your daughter. Now here I was, watching the porch light flick off, leaving me in darkness. My phone buzzed. Talia, my best friend since high school. "B, what happened?" "They kicked me out," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "Can I crash at your place tonight?" "Girl, you can stay as long as you need. I'm coming to get you right now." I heard rustling through the phone, then car keys jingling. "Thanks, T. Hey, remember what you always say when we're cooking? The best dishes come from the heart, not from following someone else's recipe." A laugh bubbled up through my tears. "Yeah. Well, this is your recipe for life, and I've tasted your cooking. You're going to make something amazing." As Talia's headlights appeared at the end of our street, I took one last look at my childhood home. Mom and Dad thought they were punishing me, but they'd actually given me something priceless: freedom. With nothing left to lose, I had everything to gain. I gripped my suitcase tighter. They wanted a doctor, but I was born to be a chef. And someday I'd make them eat their words. With the perfect wine pairing, of course. "You're burning the reduction again," Whitney called out from across the kitchen, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her workstation. "At this rate, you'll never make it through finals." I bit back a retort and focused on salvaging my sauce. 3 months into culinary school, and I was learning that passion alone wouldn't cut it. My hands were covered in burns, my savings were dwindling, and my classmates had years of professional experience while I'd only ever cooked in my family's kitchen. "Here," Talia slid next to me, quickly adjusting the heat. "Lower temperature, longer time. You're trying too hard to rush it." "Like everything else in my life," I whispered, thinking about the unopened emails from my parents' lawyer. "Hey, none of that." Talia bumped my shoulder. "You're doing this. Look, you already plate better than half the class." "Ladies," Chef Marcus's voice boomed across the kitchen. "Less chatting, more cooking. Competition day is tomorrow, and I expect excellence." Whitney sauntered over, her sauce perfectly glossy. "Some of us were born for this. Others," she glanced at my station, "might want to consider a different career path." That night I stayed late practicing, my hands shaking from exhaustion. The kitchen was my sanctuary now, the only place I felt at home since leaving mine. "You're still here?" I jumped at the voice. A man in an expensive suit stood in the doorway watching me plate. "I'm sorry, the school's closed." "No, please continue." He walked closer, studying my work. "I'm Dominic. I sit on the board here, but more importantly, I own several restaurants downtown." My heart raced as he picked up a fork and tasted my dish. "Interesting." He took another bite. "You've combined French techniques with Asian flavors. Unconventional, but it works. Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mum's kitchen," I admitted. She'd never admit it, but she taught me everything I know about Asian cuisine. I just added my own twist. Dominic nodded slowly. Tomorrow's competition. What are you making? A modern take on comfort food, something that feels like home, even when home doesn't want you anymore. His eyes softened. Well, Bianca, I look forward to tasting it. The next day, I stood trembling before the judges, my plate of reimagined Asian-French fusion comfort food before them. Whitney's perfect classical French dish sat next to mine, technically flawless but safe. When they announced the winner, Whitney's jaw dropped. I couldn't believe my ears. First place and a paid internship at Dominic's new restaurant, Bianca. Talia hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. As I accepted my certificate, I caught Dominic's knowing smile. For the first time since leaving home, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Have you seen this? Griffin slapped the newspaper down on my desk. 5 years after culinary school, we'd built our restaurant into something special, but the headline made my stomach drop. Rising Star Chefs, Innovation, Falls Flat. A review by Whitney Hamilton. I thought Whitney was your friend now, Talia said, reading over my shoulder. So did I. I scanned the scathing review. She calls my food pretentiously experimental and says I'm trying too hard to prove something. Because you are, Whitney's voice cut through the empty restaurant. She stood in the doorway looking immaculate as always. And we need to talk. You've said enough, I snapped, but she held up her hand. Not about the review, about your parents. The room went silent. I hadn't spoken to them in years, hadn't even Googled their names. What about them? Whitney pulled out her phone, showing me a social media post. They're broke, Bianca. Your father's medical practice went under after a malpractice suit. They lost everything. And this concerns me because they're looking for you. They've been asking around in restaurant circles, trying to track you down. That's why I wrote the review. I stared at her. You trashed my restaurant to keep them from finding me. I trashed your restaurant because you're hiding behind these elaborate dishes instead of cooking what you really want to cook. The food that made you win that competition years ago, that was real. This, she gestured around the restaurant, this is you trying to be something you're not. She's right, Griffin said quietly. You're not cooking for yourself anymore. You're cooking to prove them wrong. I sank into a chair, the truth hitting hard. So what do I do? Remember that fusion comfort food you made in school? Whitney sat beside me. The one that won you the competition. That's what this place should be. Not another fancy French restaurant, but something uniquely you. A complete menu overhaul? Talia looked concerned. That's risky. So was choosing cooking over medicine, I said, standing up. Griffin, call the staff in early tomorrow. We're redesigning everything. And your parents? Whitney asked. Let them come, I said, surprising myself. If they find me, they find me. But they'll be meeting me on my terms in my restaurant eating my food. Now that's the Bianca I remember, Whitney smiled. Want me to write a new review when you're ready? Make it honest this time. Always. She hugged me. And, Bianca? They really have lost everything. Your father's reputation, your mother's social standing, it's all gone. Karma's funny that way. I nodded, already planning the new menu in my head. If my parents wanted to find me, they'd find a chef who'd finally stopped trying to prove herself and started being herself instead. Reservation for 2 under Anderson, Talia read from the computer screen. Wait, isn't that your father's first name? My hands froze over the pot of simmering broth. What's the phone number? When Talia read it out, my heart stopped. I'd memorized that number through 18 years of having to call if I was going to be even 5 minutes late. It's them, I whispered. They found me. Cancel it, Griffin said immediately. We're always booked solid anyway. I shook my head, watching the steam rise from my signature fusion soup. No, Whitney was right. I'm done hiding. Table 7 needs their entrees, called one of the servers, breaking the tension. I've got it, I said, plating the dishes with practiced precision. The restaurant had transformed over the past month. Gone were the stuffy French classics, replaced by my own creations, dishes that told my story, my heritage, my journey. Dominic, now a regular customer, caught my eye as I passed his table. The new menu is extraordinary, Bianca. Finally cooking from the heart? Finally brave enough to, I admitted, setting down his bowl of soup, my mother's recipe, reimagined with my own twist. Brave? He smiled knowingly. You were brave the day you chose this path. Everything since then has just been you remembering that. My phone buzzed. A text from Whitney. Your parents' financial situation is worse than I thought. Your father can't practice medicine anymore, and your mother's been selling her jewelry. Chef? One of the junior cooks called out. The food critic from the Times is here. I straightened my chef's coat. Regular service, everyone. We cook the same for critics as we do for everyone else. Even for your parents? Talia asked softly. Especially for them. I checked the reservation time again. Tomorrow night, right? 7 p.m., she confirmed. Want me to handle the kitchen? No. I rolled up my sleeves, the burn scars from years of cooking visible like badges of honor. I'll cook for them myself. Every dish, every garnish. Bianca, Griffin started. I'm not doing it for revenge, I said, surprising myself by meaning it. I'm doing it because this is who I am. A chef. My food, my rules, my kitchen. Later that night, after service, I sat at the bar with Talia and Griffin planning the menu for tomorrow. Make it perfect, Talia advised. Not to show off, but to show them who you've become. I nodded, writing down dishes that represented my journey. The comfort food that won my first competition, the fusion dishes that made my name, and for dessert, my mother's favourite flavour combination, transformed into something entirely new. They wanted a doctor, I said. They're getting a chef instead, and I'm finally okay with that. They're here, Griffin's voice crackled through my earpiece. Your mother's wearing a blue dress that's seen better days, and your father, he looks older. I gripped my knife tighter, focusing on the precise cuts of scallion before me. Table 15 by the window. Yes, they're asking for the chef. Not yet. I carefully arranged the garnish on the first course, a delicate dumpling fusion that represented my childhood. Talia, take over expediting. I need to focus on their meal. Through the kitchen window, I caught glimpses of them. Mum's perfectly maintained appearance had slipped. Her jewellery was gone. Her dress indeed looked worn. Dad's shoulders hunched forward, his once commanding presence diminished. Your father's hands are shaking, Whitney observed, appearing beside me in the kitchen. He can barely hold the menu. Nerve damage, I said, remembering the malpractice case details she'd shared. Makes surgery impossible now. Are you sure you want to do this? I nodded, plating their first course. Send it out. From my position, I could see their reactions. Mum's eyes widened at the familiar flavours with unexpected twists. Dad actually smiled, something I hadn't seen in years. They're asking about the chef again, the server reported back. Your mother says it reminds her of something she used to make. Next course, I commanded, my hands steady as I worked. Each dish told a part of my story, the struggles, the triumphs, the journey from their kitchen to my own. Bianca, Dominic called from the kitchen door. I'm sitting near them. Want to know what they're saying? Tell me. Your mother's crying. She said she never thought she'd taste your cooking again. Your father? He's asking the server if you're here. I plated the main course, a reimagining of the last meal I'd cooked in their house. Send it. Chef. Talia touched my arm. The Times review just dropped online. 5 stars. They're calling you a visionary. Bianca, Griffin's urgent voice came through the earpiece. Your parents are asking to speak to the chef. They know it's you. Your mother said no one else could have known about the secret ingredient she always added to her dumplings. I took a deep breath, untying my apron. Tell them the chef will be out after the final course. I turned to my dessert station, preparing the last dish, a complex creation that combined my mother's favourite flavours with techniques I'd learned around the world. As I worked, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I wasn't that scared girl with a suitcase anymore. I was a chef, a leader, a success story. Ready? Talia asked as I finished plating the desserts. No, I admitted, pushing through the kitchen doors anyway, but that's never stopped me before. The dessert plates trembled slightly in my hands as I approached their table. Mum saw me first. her makeup-streaked face freezing in recognition. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. "Good evening," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I hope you've enjoyed your meals so far." "Bianca," Mom whispered, half rising from her seat. "My baby." "Please, remain seated." I placed the desserts before them with practiced precision. "This is coconut panna cotta with lychee compote and a ginger tuile. Mum, you always said those were your favourite flavours." Dad's hand reached out, then dropped. "We've been looking for you." "I know." I straightened, channeling every ounce of professional poise I'd learned. "Whitney told me." "Your food." Mom gestured at the empty plates before them. "Each dish. It was like you were talking to us." "I was." I adjusted my chef's coat. "That dumpling starter, your recipe, Mom, but I added French herbs and a modernist presentation. The main course was the last meal I cooked in your house, reimagined my way." "And now this dessert," Dad said, his voice rough. "Your mother's favourites? Made by your disappointment of a daughter?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "No," Mom burst out, tears flowing freely now. "We were wrong, so wrong. When we saw your name in the papers, the reviews, the awards, we realised we'd failed you," Dad finished. "Not the other way around." Dominic appeared at my side, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "Everything all right, Chef?" I nodded, grateful for his presence. "Yes, thank you." "Your restaurant." Mum looked around at the packed dining room. "It's beautiful. You're beautiful. And so successful." "No thanks to you," I said quietly. Dad's shoulders slumped. "We deserve that. We deserve worse. But Bianca, losing everything, it taught us what really matters. And what we lost wasn't our money or status. It was you," Mum finished. "Our daughter. Our brilliant, talented, brave daughter." I felt Talia and Griffin watching from the kitchen, Whitney from her corner table, Dominic beside me, my chosen family, the ones who'd believed in me all along. "Try the dessert," I said finally, "before it melts." They both picked up their spoons. I watched their faces as they tasted my creation, traditional flavours transformed into something new and unexpected. Mom closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. Dad's hand shook as he took another bite. "This is," he started. "Who I am," I finished. "A chef. My own person. Not who you wanted me to be, but exactly who I was meant to be." "It's perfect," Mom whispered. "I know," I said, turning to leave. "I'll send your server with the check." "Wait," Dad called out, his voice cracking. "Please, just 5 minutes." I turned back slowly, aware of every eye in the restaurant on us. 5 minutes. "Not here," Mom pleaded. "Somewhere private." I led them to my office, Talia squeezing my hand as we passed the kitchen. Inside, they stood awkwardly looking at the framed reviews and awards on my walls. "You did all this," Dad gestured at the accolades, "without any help." "No," I corrected him. "I did it with help from people who actually believed in me." Mom flinched. "We deserved that." "You deserve a lot more," I said, anger finally bubbling up. "Do you know what it's like to be 19 and homeless, to work 3 jobs while studying, to cry yourself to sleep wondering why your parents' love was conditional? We tried to find you," Dad said. "After a year, we realised our mistake, but you disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I was building this." I gestured around us. "While you were busy being ashamed of your chef daughter, I was becoming someone I'm proud to be." "We're the ones who should be ashamed," Mom stepped forward. "When your father lost his practice, when we lost everything, we finally understood what we'd done to you. We'd placed status and appearances above our own child's happiness." "And now?" I challenged. "Now that I'm successful, you want back in my life? How convenient." "No," Dad's voice was firm. "We want to apologise. Not because you're successful, but because we were wrong. Dead wrong. We've spent years regretting what we did." "We don't expect forgiveness," Mom added. "We don't deserve it, but please know that we are so, so proud of you now. Not because of your success, but because of who you are." I sat down heavily in my chair. You know what the worst part was? Every time I created a new dish, every time I won an award, every time someone praised my food, my first thought was always, I wish I could share this with Mom and Dad. Mom sobbed. Dad's hands trembled as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn newspaper clipping. We kept every article about you, every review. Even when we couldn't afford the newspapers anymore, we'd go to the library to read about you. We can't change the past, Mum said softly, but if you'd let us, we'd like to try to be part of your future, on your terms, whatever you're willing to give us. I looked at them, really looked at them. Their designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack wear, their proud postures humbled, their eyes filled with genuine regret. I can't just forget, I said finally. We know, Dad nodded. But maybe, I continued, surprising myself, maybe we can start with dinner. Once a month, here, at my restaurant. We'd like that, Mum whispered. We'd like that very much. Try this, I said, sliding a small plate across my test kitchen counter to Mom. It's a new take on your old recipe. She lifted the spoon to her lips, closing her eyes as she tasted. The spicing is different, but familiar. What did you add? Star anise. Just a touch. I watched her face carefully. These monthly cooking sessions had become our way of rebuilding bridges, one dish at a time. It works, she smiled, then hesitated. Would you consider putting this on the menu? Already planned to, as Mom's heritage soup reimagined. Her hand flew to her mouth. You'd put my name on it? Well, it is your recipe. I just elevated it a bit. Dad looked up from his corner seat, where he'd been quietly watching us cook. These days, he couldn't hold a knife steady enough to help, but he'd become our dedicated taste tester. Bianca, he said softly, do you remember what I told you the day you left? That I had until morning to change my mind. I was wrong. So wrong. He gestured at the bustling kitchen around us. This is where you were always meant to be, a leader, a creator, an artist. Speaking of leading, I said, pulling out an envelope, I've been meaning to show you something. They leaned forward as I spread out the plans on the counter. You're opening a cooking school? Mum's eyes widened. Not just any cooking school, one specifically for kids who want to pursue culinary arts but don't have family support. Full scholarships, housing assistance, mentorship programs. That's incredible, Dad whispered. I'm calling it the Second Chance Kitchen, I continued, because sometimes the hardest ingredient to find is someone who believes in you. Mum wiped her eyes. Like Dominic believed in you? And Talia? And Whitney? And Griffin? I took a deep breath. And maybe you could be involved too. Mum, nobody taught me the basics of Asian cuisine better than you. And Dad, your business experience could help these kids learn the financial side of running a restaurant. They stared at me speechless. I'm not saying I've forgotten, I added quickly, but I'm choosing to build something positive from it. Turn our story into hope for others. Dad stood slowly, steadying himself on the counter. We don't deserve this chance. No, I agreed, but those kids deserve every chance they can get. And maybe that's the best revenge, taking what hurt me and using it to help others. Mum reached for my hand across the counter. This time I let her take it. Now, I said, turning back to the stove, let me show you what I'm planning for next month's menu. I think you'll recognize some of the flavors. Behind us, the kitchen hummed with life, possibility, and the promise of new beginnings.